make a recording of this session so that if we want to play back some of Jason's answers, we can do that. So I'm your host for this session. Brenda Lidke is your tech support person. She is also on there with the Thai background. And Jason, I will go ahead and let you get us started.
So I'm not sure. Okay. So I thought maybe what I would do is I had 116 people. I thought maybe just to give a little more background in terms of kind of how we approach just kind of our leadership in general in the district. So I'm just going to switch here and then we can go just real quick. So one of the things that you kind of have this idea of management versus what we would say is strategic thinking. And there's things that potentially can get in the way of re-looking at and designing learning differently. And so most administrators and most school leaders have been brought through this traditional idea of principle of management, right? You start with planning with this idea of long-range planning or continuous improvement. And so there's a couple of flaws that we think with those. So like long-range planning is this idea that I can predict the future and then I chart a course to that future. And I think through the last discussion, that's getting harder and harder to do, to predict what that looks like. And so we may be missing the mark as we try to predict the future. And if we do that, what is the impact that has on our learners? Continuous improvement, basically continuous improvement is about taking the system never changes, and we just try to incrementally improve what it does. And I think everybody could agree that our system is probably maxed out. We're probably putting more into the system than what we're getting out of it. If we look at achievement gaps and we look at different things like that, very little has changed, over the last 30, 40 years. And so it's probably becoming more of a system thing than it is a people thing. We organize to job descriptions. We try to plug people into job descriptions. We train those people to those specific positions. This idea that we get work done through people, it's pretty authoritarian based on position. So leadership is about position than it is about anything else. And then we just ask how well we're doing something. And then we try to measure how well we're doing it. And by doing that, we just validate what we're doing. But we never start with the question of should we be doing this at all? And I think going back to the original thing that I talked about, that's one of the things that we first ask teachers to do is when you look at this idea of distance learning, what are the things that you should be doing in conjunction with the things that you shouldn't be doing or stop doing? And the nice part is sometimes when the system gets disrupted, it does give us permission to stop doing things. Like how you take attendance is a really good example, right? We take attendance for funding purposes, and that necessarily shouldn't apply in a distance learning environment. And so this idea of management sometimes can get in the way of transforming that system and making it look differently. We take the approach of strategic planning. And it's this idea of continuous creation, right? To serve an extraordinary purpose, something that's worth going after. And I think knowing why you exist as an organization and making sure that why is something really, really worth digging into and going after can change kind of the complexion of how people go about work within your system. So for us, the idea of extraordinary is something beyond where we are today. If we could do it now, it's not extraordinary. We're already doing it. But what are we going to do that we're not currently capable of? It's a means, it's not an end. And then it starts with an idea and it has to get down to that action in a classroom. And so what does that look like? Okay, so now this is more of the components of our system. Autonomous, we use the word agency, right? We try to honor people's agency. A lot of times in personalized learning, we talk about student agency, but very rarely do we talk about practitioner agency. And if we truly want teachers to design learning environments that honor student agency, then we better design learning environments and work environments for a teacher that honors their agency. This idea that we are unique and indispensable, right? Unfortunately, in our area, there's quote unquote some competition for open enrollment and things like that. And we've just decided that we're not going to directly compete. We're going to create our own unique identity. We're going to go after it in a certain way. We're going to provide kids experiences that we don't think they can get anywhere else. And that's why we exist. The resources are really the knowledge of the people. We have more advanced degrees in our system than any other profession. I mean, take a look at your own district or your own building, and the number of advanced degrees is pretty remarkable. Why would we get in the way of that work of people? With beliefs reflect your community, vitality, you're either living or dead. And then this idea of holistic, we're one thing. So anytime we add a new person to our system, it does change our system. We just hired a director of special education. She's much different than our other director of special education. And we don't want her to come in and be that person. We hired her for certain things that she's going to bring to us. And when she comes in, she's going to change our system. Just like when we hire teachers. We don't necessarily hire teachers and expect them to kind of just fit in. We hire them for the unique skill sets that they have, the knowledge that they bring, and then we want them to do the work. We really didn't hire them to tell them what to do. We hired them for their mindset, we hired them for their background, and then we let them go at it and get after it. I think that's allowed us to kind of to change. But again, we're very organic. When people say, well, is everybody doing competency-based learning in our district? Nope, not everybody's doing competency-based learning in our district. We have probably about 3/4 of our staff somewhere in that progression of beginning to say, hey, this might be for me, right? How can I do this? I like the way this sounds. So they're beginning that initial phase. We have people that are actively designing learning around it. We have people that are reporting out around it. We have people that are designing performance-based assessments around it. But we knew that if we went in and said, okay, we're all going to do competency-based learning, just like every other initiative that's happened in school district, it was probably going to fail, or it was going to be a rough ride. And so through this idea of strategic planning and really scaling out our why, we've gotten probably more people to move than I think we would have otherwise. And so we have, just like in a classroom, we have people on a progression moving in our strategic direction. We have multiple pathways for people to jump on in that. We support on demand, so our professional development looks really different for where you are in that progression. But it's really, I think, helped us become much more student-centered much quicker, because back to what I said before, we gave people time to change how they think, which will get them to change what they think, will get them to change their beliefs. So I'll get out of this, and then we can kind of see what people are thinking about.
Yeah, I think we've got a small enough group that if someone wants to ask a question, go ahead and raise your hand, and then I can unmute you, and so you could ask Jason a question directly. Let's see. I guess while people are working up their courage to be unshy and ask a question. Oh, there we have one. Nick, I'll unmute you in just a moment. I did have someone ask if you would share the slides, and I said that you do have a lot of resources posted on your presentation page. I didn't look right now to see if these slides were there, but that I would ask you to add those later. So Nick, I'm unmuted you, so you're welcome to ask a question.
All right, so one of the things, I'm at St. Thomas More High School in Rapid City, South Dakota. And one of the things that we've struggled with now going to this distant learning is getting all the teachers kind of on board. You know, some have, like you said, gone overboard with the workload. Some have barely posted anything. How do we get all the teachers to kind of buy into this process of, like you did in your district, to, you know, get them all on the same boat with this e-learning?
Yeah, so I think part of it becomes, right, you kind of have to build, and it's hard to do on the run. So I think that's part of it. But I think stepping back and say, okay, what do we really want kids to be able to know and be able to do? So for us, when we started this process, one of the things that we did to try to get people on the same page is come up with some things outside their content area, because it's really hard. I was a high school principal, high school math teacher, and secondary people get really caught on their content. I understand that because they love their content. I love my math. I love my chemistry. But one of the things that we did early on in our journey was ask our teachers to start thinking about what are some of those other things that we want our kids to have experience in that's not necessarily driven by content, but your content can support that. So what we did as a building is we came up with 4 things. And so the first one was we wanted students to be able to advocate for themselves in a respectful manner, right? So if I walk out of a K-12 system and I'm not able to advocate to myself, talk to an adult in a respectful way, then we got issues, right? How am I going to go find success out in quote unquote the real world if I can't do that? Now, not all kids do that well, and you have to create systems and opportunities for that to happen, because it doesn't just happen naturally for kids, especially coming out of that system. Another part of that was this idea of managing their workflow. We wanted to give kids an opportunity to make decisions about what their learning would look like. Another one was to handle, to accept challenges and handle quote unquote failing through this idea of grit and perseverance. That if I quote unquote fail or make mistakes, it's part of that learning process. And then the last one was basically handle the ups and downs of life. And so as a as a 912 building, we spent a lot of time figuring out what indicators of those would look like. And we're still working on that, but also how do I build these into lesson design? So I think part of it is, and again, this is not a great answer to your question, but coming around, why do we really exist, right? If we solely exist to pump out content and have kids complete things, well, that looks different than if we exist to give kids these experiences and give them access to content and those different things. And so I think it really becomes, kind of setting that overall framework for your building. Now, again, that when you're doing that on the fly, I think that makes it really hard. But I do think you're probably where you're at, and it might be difficult to really change things over the next month and a half. But I do think it gives you a great point for reflection when this is all finished, right? I think to start to talk about what went well, what didn't go well, what are things that we tried or didn't try, so that again, we kind of come underneath a similar umbrella of what's our purpose and why we exist, and then let people figure that out within each class and grade level. So it's not a great answer, but I think it really starts with figuring out why, right? Why do we exist? What are we trying to instill in kids? And how do we use our content to support that?
Jason, there's a couple questions here. I'll pose them both, and then you can decide which one you want to tackle first. Someone mentioned that we want to differentiate for students and let them kind of be at different paces, but that we tend to not do that for teachers. I know you have probably dealt with teacher professional learning in a different way because you're trying to model that. And I know there are schools across the state that are doing that. So that would be one question. The other one is about emotional learning and critical thinking. And the Barry is asking what tools and strategy you're using to give students more opportunity to develop critical thinking for the content that they're accessing. So I'll stop with those questions and you can address them as you would like.
Yeah, so I think the talking about whether it's differentiation or multiple pathways, however you want to frame that up for students, I think from our perspective, when I was an assistant principal and a principal in the high school, one of the things we noticed really quickly that, our kids were really compliant, right? Tell me what I got to do to learn, how do I get points for this, those sorts of things. But our teachers were very compliant too. Now that's not a knock on anybody. That's just the way the system was designed. So ultimately, if we wanted to create these personalized learning experiences, these customized learning environments, that's some of the words we used early on for our kids, we most certainly had to give our staff opportunities to engage in those types of things, which forced us to look at our professional learning differently, right? Because the old school model of professional learning was just like what our teachers were doing with kids. I take whatever the topic is, I give it to everybody, regardless of where they were in that learning journey. So we had to figure out and give opportunities for teachers that would look different based on readiness. Now, just like a regular classroom, do we still do some direct instruction? Most certainly. For us, and this kind of answers the second part of the question of critical thinking, for us, we needed all of our staff, K through 12, to have a really good understanding of Webb's depth of knowledge. And really, what was 1 and 2, kind of that recall, low level stuff, and what is 3 and 4? Because what we ultimately wanted to have happen was our students to engage less in 1 and 2 and more in 3 and 4. Now, that can happen in lots of different ways. For us as a system, we organize that through competencies. And so we develop competencies, created competencies, the corresponding rubrics with the learning progressions. And that's all built, the rubrics are all built off of Webb's depth of knowledge. So to be competent in our system, that's at a 3 or 4, okay? The 1s and 2s kind of lead up for us beginning and approaching, but we designed specifically with 3 and 4 in mind. Now, does every one of our teachers use competency-based learning to get students to work at 3 and 4? Most certainly not. If they found something and they can provide evidence that their students are working in that, and that evidence is student work, what we observe in students, what students are able to demonstrate, if they can provide evidence of it, we're good to go, and we let them go with that sort of a thing. But it's that idea of, to the first question, modeling with your staff. And so we give our teachers 8 hours of personalized professional development. They get to decide what they want to do with those 8 hours. They fill out just a small log, not this giant, compliance-based report. A small Google form talks about what their learning is, how they're going to apply it. And that was really hard for some of our teachers at first, right? Just like when you're working with students and you try to honor their agency and give them lots of choice, it doesn't go well right away for some people because they've never had to do it before. So then we had to step back and say, what are those scaffolds? So from an administrative standpoint, we tried to model the design of learning for our teachers based on what they were doing in their classrooms. And so again, how did we get them to work at higher levels and stuff? So I think those two questions kind of go together, but really that critical thinking piece is embedded for us in Webb's depth of knowledge and ensuring that our kids are working at, which has caused us to look at assessment differently, right? I mean, if we're gonna have kids working at 3 and 4, the old Scantron social studies assessment and things like that, it could be part of it, but that can't be the end product for those things. So, which has led us to talk about grading differently, reporting out differently at the high school. We now have 5 classes that report out on competencies. They actually don't put a number in Infinite Campus until we're still traditional transcripts, so we're not all the way there yet. They change it over, but there's nothing in there until then. Our elementary schools are standard based, but they are discussing now of moving towards competency based too.
Okay, Jason, I don't see any other hands raised, but if someone would like to ask a question, I'll go ahead and give you a moment to raise your hand so I can unmute you. We did have another couple questions come across. One person related that a lot of what you're talking about sounds very similar to Carol Dweck's information about mindset. And they're wondering if you do some specific professional learning and intentional work with that material. And then another person asked if your school uses the same platform for all teachers,
Yep.
or if they allow teachers to differentiate. I did respond in chat that my experience is that a very good platform, still I can use Schoology as an umbrella, and I can still be using Google and
Yep.
I can do all sorts of things within it.
Yep.
So I know there's that tension between giving teachers voice and choice about their tools, and then also the tension with families. I know for a fact from people I've talked to, they can't figure out this child logs into this and this calendar and they get an email and they have to go here, and another child does something else, and parents are confused in many cases. So I don't see any hands up, so I can let you respond to those questions.
Yeah, so I'll start with the platform. So yeah, we do. I mean, I think you hit it right on, right on nail on the head, Julie. With that, so we're Schoology, so that's our LMS, and so from Schoology basically flows everything else. We're also Google Enterprise, so those are the two main things that we use. And so off of that, we do have some people that use Moodle a little bit, but that again, that flows right from Schoology. So if you need to get anything and students need to access anything, it's right there. So for our digital stuff, it all flows through Google. So we have some people that will work off of that, which again, we're okay with, all right, some of those things, but it all has to flow back through some of the commonalities. I think you also bring up a really good point of the confusion with families and things like that. We've asked our staff, not just through distance learning, that anytime you're going to introduce anything new, you need to give people time to get comfortable with it, right? So if it's going to be something new for students, or if it's going to be something new for students and families, you do have to give them plenty of time to engage with it, practice it, and do it before you really kind of hit the switch and it's going to be maybe your main mode for something. Our elementaries will use Seesaw a little bit, especially in our younger grades. So they'll do that a little bit as well. But for the most part, we're Schoology and Google Classroom. And then kind of the direct work. And so we haven't done any specific training around that. The training has been more around the discussion of what is our responses going to be when things don't go well, right? Student misses assignment, student fails a test, student is tardy, student is absent, student isn't connecting online. I think our responses to those either are going to support the idea of growth mindset or they're going to inhibit it. The compliance responses of you miss class, you're tardy, there's going to be ultimately a consequence on the back end of that, is going to ruin that, right? I mean, so I think it was more in terms of talking and sharing and coming to common understandings about how were we going to support students building that idea of growth mindset and helping scaffold those sorts of things. And I think, to be honest with you, coming up with common understandings of what those look like at grade levels or at team levels was probably just as valuable as going around, some heavy professional development, because ultimately you have to come to an understanding of what the responses are going to be when things don't happen. And those responses are going to be what impact on the kids. And even from our standpoint, right? If we have teachers try things and do things, and we say we give you permission to fail, we give you opportunities to do things, and then it doesn't go right, well, my response to that is going to ultimately impact what that teacher does the next time down the road. And so I think it's more along the lines coming up with a common understanding that if we say this is what we believe, then our actions better show that.
Jason, I just want to circle back to the point you made about typically teachers would have a lot of time to get used to a system and learn how to use it. I think everyone, I mean, it probably goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway. All teachers in South Dakota found out on a Friday that we were moving to remote learning. And some of them had a luxury of maybe a couple spring break days early that next week. Most did not. Most had to quickly figure this out on the fly. And they've done a fabulous job of that. I do think it is worth noting that it seems critical for school systems to probably figure out what their main LMS or what their main system is going to be going forward, because they didn't have the time that they would have wanted to communicate with parents and communities say, hey, everybody, on Monday morning, you'll need to log in to Schoology or Canvas or Google Classroom. It's a reality that in the fall, schools may start in a different fashion. It's definitely not going to be the regular thing. It could be staggered schedules. It could be alternate days to allow for more space in classrooms. It is going to be different. We won't start up the same way. And so it will be critical for educators and leaders and systems to figure out what they're going to do over the summer so that everyone knows what's going on. Is there some advice you can offer about how do you go about that? How do you choose a system that still allows for that teacher creativity, but that also gives everyone a main landing point?
Yeah, I think that's I think that's a tough question. So I think, when you get dumped into something, right, that's really, really hard, because I think that's some of the things that we tried to caution our teachers about. When we knew we were doing distance learning, I think everybody's reaction was, we got to do this right away, right? We got to get going. We got to get up and running and things like that. And so, you probably can't fix this now, but my suggestion would be, again, even if we say, hey, we're going to get up and use Schoology or whatever that is, to allow enough time for the people to have some opportunity to mess around with it and work with that. I think sometimes in education, we want to go so fast that we get left, we actually kind of get left behind, because people aren't ready or don't have an opportunity to kind of to move around with things and stuff like that. And so that's, it goes back to what we talk, less is more, right? I mean, for us, we really wanted to focus on the less is more, make sure that people were comfortable with things, make sure things were working with families. And we're 3 weeks in now, and I just sent an email to staff on Friday, and one of the things I talked about was, okay, you might be feeling better about distance learning now, but I'm going to caution you, if you're going to try to do something new and do something different, you need to most certainly build in enough time for people to kind of get comfortable with that. I think when we come back to school next year, I think part of the summer planning needs to be around reflection on the last 2 months. There's going to be things that we're going to learn through this process, and it may not necessarily be to content, but it might be with how we communicate with families, how we implement new things, how we organize different things. But it might also be, what can we not do, right? I think this is a wonderful opportunity to start to step back and say, I was doing a lot of stuff as a school district or as a classroom teacher that really doesn't have any impact and really doesn't really enhance things, other than the fact that I just did it. I've always done it and I do it well, sort of a thing, and start to have discussions when we come back. Because if you're talking about staggered starts and kids coming in at different times and those sorts of things, the design of learning is going to have to look much differently. I see in here there's a question. We will still, yeah. I don't necessarily think schools aren't going to exist in kind of this new design of learning. I think more around the idea of what does the actual design look like, right? I mean, and how do we engage students in those deeper levels of learning around a core set of things? And how do we shift from that idea that I'm going to expect my kids to learn on demand to where I'm more available to teach on demand? I mean, I wouldn't be as worried about coming back to school next year if we were fully a competency-based system K through 12, because we would just be able to pick up kids where they are, right? And then continue to move them along. And we're not at that place yet. So we're going to have to really work with our staff to first identify, where are your learners at when they come back? Where are they with their reading? Where are they with their math? Those sorts of things. And then figure out, how are we going to support them moving forward? But with the idea that we're not going to quote, we may not catch them up. And that's okay too, because I think sometimes when we get caught into this idea that, well, they're supposed to be a fourth grader, but they're really a third and a half grader because of what happened. And I got to get them ready for fifth grade. That's going to put too much stress on the students. It's going to put too much stress on on the teachers, and it's not going to be a good experience for anybody. It gives us a chance to reboot and say, okay, how do we move our kids forward? And really, fifth grade and what we expect kids to live in fifth grade, I get it, state standards and things like that, but those are all things that the system has put in place to be organized. We should have an opportunity to kind of relook at those things.
Nick, Jason, Nick asked a question and you really just kind of addressed it without knowing that, but he was talking about, about the reasonable expectations of where students need to be. And I think you emphasized in a normal system, we assume every third grader got all the third grade learning and that they're going to be ready for fourth grade learning. In a competency-based system, which there are a number of schools around the state, a lot of people hear about what's going on at Harrisburg. In their elementary implementation, they may have a child who is aged to be in third grade, but they're doing some second grade work, some fourth grade work, some third grade work, because they're working in a competency-based system. And again, if we'd have had the opportunity for all of us to be doing competency-based learning, we wouldn't have that worry, because we would already be in control in a competency-based system where we're out of control with a traditional system.
And I think to Nick's point, I think part of it is what's a reasonable expectation? I really don't know what a reasonable expectation is, to be quite honest with you. I think we talk about the different environments that our kids are in, the different supports that they're going to get, things like that. I think I would caution people to try to determine what that is and spend more time trying to figure out how are we going to determine actually where they are, and then plan forward, because we could miss the target one way or another. I mean, there might be kids that have never really engaged or taken off, but this different organization and this different way of engaging maybe gives them an opportunity to do things and show learning in ways they've never done before, and they take off and other kids fall behind. And so I've really cautioned all of our staff not to worry about that. Don't worry about next year right now. Do the best you can around those things that you've done, and then we'll figure it out. Because I think the more you try to determine what we think kids should be at, I think it runs a risk of just putting so much stress on everybody within the system. It's going to be tough. I see another question about office hours. So the elementary, they kind of design their own days, and so within that, they have times that they're available. They've started to do, actually, our elementaries have started to do a lot of outreach to parents specifically, and not just students, to check in with the parents and make sure that things are going with the parents. Do the parents have questions on anything? Is there anything getting in the way of the parents? Our secondary buildings our middle schools have an A and B day, and so day one of our plan is an A day, day two is a B day, and then that's that check-in day. And within those A and B days, they actually have times where teachers are available for like first hour, second hour. So the teacher may do some direct instruction during that time, or they might just be available. And the kids don't have to worry about competing with, at 10 o'clock, 3 different teachers wanting to meet at that time. And then our high school does the same thing. On day one, they do periods 1, 3, and 5. And then on day 2, they do periods 0, 2, and 4. And then they do their advisory. We have a post-secondary curriculum that we use to kind of help kids, do some of these inventories and things like that. They do that on that third day. So I guess the answer to that is yeah.
Jason, we've got about just a little over 5 minutes left, and there's about 3 or 4 questions in the chat. So I don't know if it's more efficient for me to relay those to you. There's some things about how you graduate with a competency-based system, how parents are informed. There's a question about are we getting to a point where we're going to change up the large summer system? So I know you don't have time to answer all of those, but I will let you answer your questions there.
Yeah, so the first one, I see one in here about the phone calls. So I cannot underscore the impact the phone calls had on our families. The question, how to get your teachers to buy into the value. So we had some teachers that were skeptical about doing that and so we're organized, like in the elementaries, you can call your classroom. Our middle schools have a Tiger Connection with about 23 kids. And then in our high school, we have ramp class. And we just said, this is something you got to do, right? We don't ask very much, but we said, if we're going to do distance learning really well, we need to connect with families specifically to figure out how things are going in their particular situation. And again, this is kind of the benefit of me having a wife that teaches. And so she called 23 people. She spent on average 15 minutes with each parent. And it was crazy. The parents weren't talking about distance learning. They weren't talking about organization of stuff. It was like, how are you doing? How's your family doing? It was just checking in. And I think with how things have gone in our society lately, people are craving literally like personal connection in some way, shape, or form. And I think that phone call was a huge kickoff. And it was so positive that staff have readily continued to do that. And I get it. I mean, in my position, there's people I have to call that I know most of my phone calls are not fun phone calls, right? I had somebody that's mad at me and things like that. But this has just flipped it, because we're not talking about behavior. We're just, how are you? And I think that's been a very, very positive thing. So about devices, our families can opt to keep devices over the summer. We've been doing that for about 6 years, and about 75% of our families opt to keep the devices. Let's see, pop back up here. So do we have students graduating at different time? Like I said, we're not fully competency based at the high school, but we do have kids graduate. We're on trimesters. We don't have very many kids graduate after first trimester, but we will have a handful after second trimester. But they have to have a plan. So we don't just let you graduate because you say you're ready. We have their parents come in. We sit down with the counselor and one of the assistant principals, and we just talk about what the plan is and why. Again, for us, why is a huge thing. So we want to know why you're planning on doing it. It might be because I want to get a job and things like that. I don't think we ever say no, but we want to be part of that conversation about why that is. There's a question like 8:30 to 3:30. The schedules that our teachers have, that our parents have access to, really the schedule for students is like 10 until 2, built in with those class periods. We do have some time in the morning if they have to do staff meetings and things like that. But I will say that, we've had to tell staff that it's okay to tell families that I'm not answering emails, anymore tonight. I'll get back to you tomorrow, that sort of thing, because they want to help. And I think sometimes you can get overburdened if you're always looking at trying to answer those types of things. Are parents involved in a competency-based system? We do a lot of competency-based learning nights. And the really cool thing about our competency-based, it's all come from our teachers. So our teachers are the first line of communication. Our teachers communicate to their parents why it's important, how it's going to benefit their kids. And guess what? Parents love teachers. And so, and when they get some pushback, the teacher can be the one to answer why. And us as a district support that, but it all comes from the teachers. And so it's been really positive. And it's hard for parents to think about things differently. Even if they didn't like our system, they're familiar with it. So any changes is difficult. But anytime we can, we talk to families, whether it's those engagement nights or those personal phone calls when they have questions about it, it helps a lot. But it's our teachers doing a majority of that. The competency-based learning nights, really, it just talks about a couple of things. What the design of learning looks like that's different. And then really for parents, how the reporting out is going to be different. So we use Infinite Campus, and there is an add-on called Campus Learning, and you can actually put the rubrics right into that. And so we walk parents through how to access those rubrics, what those rubrics mean, where students are in that learning progression, how they can move from beginning to approaching to competent to extending, the opportunities that they're going to have and things like that. So it's really just kind of a how-to night, because really what parents want to know is, how's my kid doing, right? And if you can show them how to figure that out, then they're good with it.
Okay, Jason, we are closing in on the end of this discussion topic session. Let me just tell people what's going to happen, and then if you have any closing comments you'd like to make, I'll turn that back over to you. When Jason concludes, I will end the meeting for all. You will have a 20-minute break, and then at 10 o'clock Mountain Time, we will start in with our breakout session. So you should go back to the schedule on the TIE Conference website, and then you will have 3 live sessions to choose from for your 10 o'clock offering. And of course, you're all doing beautifully getting into sessions. Looks like there were 166 of you here, so you will be able to enter the other sessions just like you have previously. So Jason, are there any comments you would like to close with as we round out this session?
No, I just think that, right, as we get through all this, I just keep talking to people about taking the time to reflect. There's going to be some good things that come out of distance learning. We know there's going to be some things too that haven't been good for everybody. And I think when you start to think about when we're bringing our kids back, it gives us a unique opportunity to start to say, how can learning look different, right? And how can we better serve each student instead of groups of kids? And I think we just got to keep drilling down to making it better for each kiddo in our system.
All right. Thank you, Jason, and thank you everyone this morning for joining us for this discussion topic. We will see you all again at 10 o'clock. So take a break, grab some coffee, and see you soon. Bye now.